Hey everybody, this is Mark and welcome back to Beyond Profit, a global perspective. And today we're going to talk about PESTLE analysis. We're not talking about a mortar and pestle. We're talking about a method of trying to analyze the conditions that are inside a country so we can figure out whether or not it's favorable to a market entry by a business in your industry. If you're a student putting together a business plan, or a professional putting together a business plan where you're trying to take a business and move it someplace overseas, I think you might find this analysis very helpful as you do your research. So without any further delay, let's get into it. And as usual, if you find these videos are things that are helpful for you, then please like, subscribe, share. I hope that we're putting out some information that might be helpful to you at some level. PESTLE is an acronym, P.E.S.T.L.E. Each letter represents an indicator, something that you ought to research when you're comparing, say, business in your own country versus business in another country. And particularly when you're looking at that country, what are those factors? And specifically, how do they pertain to your business and your industry? P stands for political factors. These factors take into account the political situation in the country and the world in relation to the country. So we have a few questions, some things we may want to research as we look at this factor, right? How does government leadership affect your industry? That's kind of an important question. If you're dealing with, say, a country that has a strong socialist party involved, it's possible they may nationalize industries, right? That's certainly been the case with the oil industry in Venezuela, for example. So taking into consideration the likelihood that a government is going to do something to mess with your industry, it's kind of an important thing to know. Think about risk models of entry. This is one aspect of risk, but there's a lot of elements of risk, right? Do we have people living in urban areas who are not very well fed and you're using them as cheap labor, right? I mean, that seems to me a possible recipe for rioting and all sorts of security problems that may challenge your business, right? How much support are you going to have from the government? Or is this a risk that you want to take? So these are things you've got to think about when you're thinking about political factors, right? I would also say it's important to research the policies, laws, every tariff that government levies. All of these sorts of things are things that may affect your risk. If you have a country that is inclined toward free trade, that might be a safer place for you to go into. If you have political parties that are a little more inclined toward protectionism and tariffs and other sorts of things, then it's something that you ought to know about. The E in PESTLE stands for economic factors. These include all the determinants of the economy and its condition, right? We're talking inflation rate, interest rates, monetary or fiscal policies, foreign exchange rates, things that affect imports and exports. All of these might determine the direction in which the economy might move. Businesses analyze this factor based on their environment so they can build strategies that fall in line with any of these possible changes that might occur. With S, we're talking about social factors. Different social mindsets cast an impact on the businesses and sales of their products and services. So we're talking about cultural implications, gender connected and other connected demographics, right? Social lifestyles, domestic structures. All of these are studied by companies in order to try to understand the market and the consumer better. T is technological factors. Technology vastly influences a business and certainly influences the way that it interacts with that market. Changes every minute. Right? Every company needs to stay connected along the way and know when to integrate and really have a good understanding of what level of technology their country is at. For some, it might not make a big difference, right? If you're selling machine parts and it's an industrial-based company or country, maybe no big deal, right? But if you're using something that is that requires high technology for production, Or if you're going for a consumer base and you want to try to sell some high-tech product to them, you need to make sure that they're ready to use that technology, right? I mean, classic example is like, how can you use a cell phone if you don't have towers, right? If you don't have the infrastructure in place in order to make that happen. If you can't get a signal, there's certain sorts of technology that just isn't going to go anywhere, right? And then you have to think about how it changes your business specifically, right? Is there something unique about your business and technology that you need to know about as it pertains to that country? Do you have a product that's technologically dependent? What are the costs? Are you ahead of the curve? And then it's important to understand how those consumers react to the technological trends and how they utilize them to their benefit. L stands for legal factors. Legislative changes occur from time to time, and many of them affect business environment. So let's say if a regulatory body set up a regulation for industries, then that law would impact all the industries and businesses that are in that economy. And there are a lot of legal things that have to be taken into account when you're thinking about entering a country, right? One of them is, what's the legal structure of the business entity in that country, right? I mean, in the United States, we think about corporations, sole proprietorships, franchises, right? Do the same rules apply in that country as to the United States, or how are those rules different? Do you have to register in some way, right? Something we could talk about in the future also is in regard to entry strategy. There's some countries that require joint ventures in order to try to enter that country, but understand that legal aspect of it is really important. And it's also important to developing any part of a business plan, specifically that part that deals with entry strategies. You have to work out a good entry strategy in order to be able to go to that country. Here's another legal question, right? Where are you precisely going to set up shop? Now, I know this is a bit like real estate, it's a little bit like marketing, it's a little bit like logistical planning, but there's a legal aspect of this thing too, right? If you're building a structure or renting a structure, renovating a structure, right? There's all sorts of rules about that, right? What are the national and local regulations, the licensing hurdles you have to go through, the zoning requirements? A lot of this has to do with legal stuff. And it also does have implications in other parts of a business plan, such as it pertains to marketing and entry strategy as well. Then there's intellectual property. If you have a product that is highly reliant upon intellectual property, then you need to be aware of what that country's law is, and in terms of whether or not you're going to be protected. For example, China's not a great place to go if you're interested in protecting intellectual property, right? I think a lot of us understand this by now, right? Laws on protecting intellectual property just aren't as strong in China as they are in many other parts of the world. And there's a cultural bias against it. It doesn't really take into account the ownership of an idea, for example, an image. So it sort of makes sense to them, like, hey, you see those shoes over there and they've got this swish on it, right? Well, they seem to be selling a whole lot. If we put a swish on our shoes, maybe we'll sell a lot too, right? This notion that there is inherent value in this image that's attached to the shoe is something that is not really ingrained in the way that they look at business. Then there are labor laws. How are employees treated differently from the United States, right? This is not only important in terms of your analysis of which country to go into, but important once you actually develop a business plan when you're figuring out what's your HR approach. Then you've got to know about taxes, right? National, local sales taxes. What are you going to pay? What are the rates, right? So understanding those, because those are an important part of expenses, and so that has a strong impact on the financial aspect of your plan as well as HR aspects, right? You have to know if you're going to pay somebody, I mean, what are the taxes going to be? And finally, you have to familiarize yourself with trade laws, right? Are you relying upon importing certain products, right? How does that work? Are there restrictions on that? What are the regulations regarding to that? So that's another important legal consideration. And there's E for environmental factors, and that is the location itself may influence the way that you do business, right? Climatic changes could alter the trade of industries, the way consumers react to a certain offering that's launched in the market, right? Environmental factors could include geographical location, climate, weather, other such factors that are not just limited to climatic conditions, right? And they have a strong impact on certain kinds of businesses. For example, most obvious one would be the ag industry, right? Weather and location, all sorts of things like that. Physical location really impacts how people do business in that sector. With a PESTLE analysis, you have the ability to look at a country and look at different factors that may inform whether or not your business is going to be a good fit for that country. So my recommendation, go into all of those different areas, right? Do some serious research and use these to put together a business plan. I have another video in which you can use a decision matrix and use the PESTLE analysis to try to inform to create some quantitative data points that will help you put some of this stuff together. That's for a future video. But for now, go do some research, check out your PESTLE. I think you're going to find a lot of really great ways of analyzing whether or not you should make that decision to make that entry. For Beyond Politics, Global Perspective, I'll see you next time.